I was the only one to see the light go out in her eyes. The last time I heard her, she was asking for forgiveness for something she didn't even know she had done. The guilt consumed her and I was left with the weight of it. For years, I watched my sister strive to please. I remember her radiant smile as she helped at church, organizing events, welcoming new members. The smell of fresh coffee in the meeting room, the laughter echoing within the walls. She was the one everyone loved, but there was a profound silence within her, an echo that no one noticed. I saw her let herself go, sacrificing her own essence to keep the peace, but peace comes at a price, and I knew something was about to happen. On that fateful day, everyone was gathered, and the pastor began to speak about the importance of unity, of family. His tone was solemn, almost prophetic. It was then that I heard my name. My heart raced. Maria's sister is not doing her part. The room was in shock, and everyone's eyes turned to me. I couldn't understand. The moment he said that, I felt the ground open up beneath my feet. The words were like knives, cutting the bond I had with my sister. What they didn't know was that Maria already carried a huge burden. She always thought she needed to be perfect, that the family's happiness depended on her. But the truth was I was there, invisible, helping, but never seen, and now I was the one to blame. At that instant, I realized that the true injustice was not what was said, but everything my sister endured in silence. They never knew that her faith was a fortress, but also a prison. Her love turned into guilt, and I, unwittingly, became the cause of it. But something was changing inside me. Anger began to grow. The guilt Maria carried was not hers. It was mine, of all of us who never listened to her. The truth is she was always the true heroine, bearing everything while we ignored her. I learned that God does not want us to carry the weight of guilt. He wants us to be free. And freedom begins when we speak, when we reveal those silences that imprison us. Her pain became mine, but also the strength I needed to change. Today, looking back, I see that pain is not just a wound. It is a call, a reminder that sometimes the people we love need our voice, our protection. Silence is not peace. And those who love must have the courage to speak, to challenge, to fight. God knows what is in each person's heart. And I learned that true peace comes from love that does not remain silent. The freedom to be who we are, without fear of rejection, is what really matters. Sometimes, the worst pain is not carrying the guilt, but seeing those we love suffer because of it. Have you ever experienced something like this? Have you ever felt that someone else's guilt became yours? It is painful, but it is worth reflecting on how we are capable of carrying others' burdens. If this story touched you, maybe it's time to share it with someone who needs to hear it. I remember one particular night, a moment that became a milestone in my understanding. It was one of those meetings where everyone was eager to hear stories of overcoming and faith. Maria was there, sitting in the front row, with a smile that did not reflect her pain. The pastor was talking about miracles, about God's ability to transform lives. But, while everyone was applauding, I realized that the transformation she most desired was getting lost amidst the applause. That night, I couldn't hold back the tears. Those words that were supposed to be of hope, to me, sounded like an echo of despair. How could we talk about miracles if we couldn't see the miracle that was right in front of us? Maria, so dedicated, so full of love, was slowly falling apart, and we, blind by our own faith, were not helping her. And then an idea began to form inside me. What would happen if I started to speak? If I decided to raise my voice for her? But doubt paralyzed me. The fear of being rejected, of being seen as the problematic sister, prevented me from acting. Deep down, I knew my voice could be what she needed. But what tormented me most was the possibility that if I spoke, it might be me who was expelled from that community I loved so much. But that night, something changed. Looking at Maria, I saw not just the sister I loved, but a woman who deserved to be heard, who deserved to be seen in all her complexity. I could no longer be complicit in this silence. What I did not realize was that this decision to speak up would not only be a way to free her, but also a way to free myself. The following week, I mustered up the courage. During the service, when the opportunity to share testimonies arose, I stood up. My heart was pounding and my voice was trembling, but I knew I had to do this. I told the group what I was seeing, what I was feeling. I spoke about the pressure Maria was carrying, about the love that turned into guilt, about the need to look at those around us. The words came out as a confession, but also as a cry for help. The silence that followed was deafening. Some eyes turned to me, others looked away. as if I had touched on something that should not be mentioned, but to my surprise. After the service, some people approached. They began to share their own stories of pain, silence, and guilt. There, at that moment, I realized that I was not alone. From then on, a change began to happen. It wasn't easy, and I didn't have all the answers. But I realized that vulnerability could be a bridge. Maria began to open up, and the weight that once seemed unbearable began to dissipate. The conversations we had at home became deeper, more truthful. She started to understand that she didn't need to be perfect, that her life shouldn't be a performance, but an authentic experience. And that's how the church began to change as well. The pastor, realizing the impact my words had, started to include topics about mental health and the importance of caring for each other, not just spiritually but also emotionally. Initially, there was resistance, but gradually, people began to open up. The silence that once prevailed started to be filled with shared stories of pain, healing, and reconciliation. But, as with everything in life, change brought new challenges. Some people were not ready to listen. Some said I was being exaggerated, that I should leave things as they were. But I knew it wasn't just about me or about Maria. It was about everyone carrying invisible burdens. What surprised me the most was that amid this resistance, new bonds of friendship emerged. Those who were willing to listen were able to see beyond the surface. And together we began to build a safer, more welcoming space. This journey of speaking and being heard led me to a deeper place of connection with my faith. I began to understand that true spirituality is not about following rules, but about loving and being loved. It's about being honest. Even if the truth hurts, I learned that to find the light within us, we first need to face the shadows. There are still days when fear tries to take over, when guilt whispers that I am not worthy of being heard. But when that happens, I remember Maria. I remember her shy smile and the sparkle that began to return to her eyes when she realized she wasn't alone. That is the strength that moves me. It is the certainty that, in the end, each of us has a story that deserves to be told. And so, I move forward, with the hope that the courage of one can inspire many. Because, deep down, we all and we, even if invisible, can be the change we so desire to see. Over time, I realized that my journey was not just about speaking for Maria, but about giving voice to all those stifled stories. Those that, like hers, were hidden under layers of expectation and perfection. What I did not expect was that, by opening my mouth, I would also find myself, the woman who had gotten lost in the role of sister, in the role of daughter, in the role of friend. It was as if every word I uttered tore a bit of the veil that covered my own pain. Once, in a conversation with a new friend from church, she shared an experience that deeply touched me. She spoke about how she felt invisible, not just in the community, but in her own home. Her words echoed what I had felt for so long. "It's like I'm screaming, but no one can hear," she said, with moist eyes. The connection formed at that moment was powerful. What once seemed to be an individual burden began to transform into a collective responsibility, a call to action. That's how we decided to organize an informal meeting, a safe space where people could share their experiences without fear of judgment. The objective was simple: to create a welcoming environment where everyone could feel free to speak the name we chose. Silence Voices reflected precisely this. I invited Maria to be one of the first to speak, and to my surprise, she accepted. That night, the atmosphere was charged with expectation. What happened next was something I could never have imagined. Upon hearing Maria open up about her struggles, her insecurities, and the weight she felt, something inside myself broke, not just because she was sharing her pain, but because I saw the transformation in her eyes. She was no longer the perfect sister. She was a vulnerable, authentic woman, and that was profoundly beautiful. The voices began to flow. Each story shared was a thread weaving a new tapestry of solidarity. One woman spoke about the pressure she felt to be the perfect mother, another about the loneliness that accompanied her on her journey of faith. Each account was a stone rising against the silence that had previously prevailed. I saw tears, but I also saw smiles of relief, as if each word spoken was a step toward liberation. At the end of the meeting, as everyone dispersed, a group of people approached me. They were emotional, thanking me for creating that space. "I never realized other people felt this way," one of them said. "This changes everything." And at that moment, I realized that the impact was not only about Maria or me, it was about all of us. The courage of a small group was creating waves that could reach many others. But not everything was easy. Some people in the community still resisted the change. I remember a tense conversation with one of the church leaders who opposed discussing emotional and mental health issues during services. Faith should be enough, he said, with a look of disapproval. But I knew it wasn't just about having faith. It was about taking care of each other. How could we truly love if we weren't willing to listen to the pain that surrounded us? It was a challenge, but I was determined with every step we took. I felt stronger. The resistance only strengthened my determination. I began meeting with a group of women who shared the same vision. Together, we decided to create a campaign to highlight the importance of emotional health within the church. What started as a private conversation turned into a larger movement. A month later, we organized a retreat. It was a space dedicated to self-discovery, healing, and reconnecting with faith. What started as a simple idea turned into something grand. The retreat was a success, and people began to open up in ways I had never imagined. What I saw there was a true revolution. The tears that were once hidden now became a bridge to healing. During that retreat, Maria had the courage to share her story with a larger group. When she spoke, her gaze was filled with a new light. The pain that once consumed her was now a testimony of strength, and as people listened to her story, some began to identify with it. They also had their own struggles, their own silent battles. The space filled with mutual understanding, with a love that transcended words. At that moment, I realized that healing was not just individual, it was collective. Our stories were interconnected, forming a network of solidarity that sustained us, and, more importantly, the courage to be vulnerable was creating a new kind of community, one where silence was no longer the norm, but rather the voice of truth. Now, looking back, I see how far we've come. What started as a silent cry within me transformed into a symphony of voices echoing throughout the church. The stories that were once stifled were now told aloud, and the pain that once separated us was transforming into bonds of understanding and empathy. The atmosphere of welcome was being cultivated, and gradually, people began to realize that vulnerability was not weakness, but a powerful strength that united us. The Silence Voices meetings became a regular gathering place. There, each person had the space to share their struggles, their hopes, and even their doubts about faith. It was a place where we were not just members of a congregation, but human beings with unique stories. I saw mothers and fathers opening up about the pressures they faced, teenagers sharing their insecurities, and even church leaders revealing their own vulnerabilities. What used to be an environment of appearances began to turn into a space of authenticity. Maria, who once seemed so distant and lost, began to flourish amidst this new dynamic. She became an active voice, helping to organize meetings and encouraging others to open up. Watching her transformation was a gift. The light that once had disappeared in her eyes now shone brightly. She started to understand that her value was not in perfection, but in the courage to be who she truly was. It's incredible how the freedom to be authentic can illuminate even the darkest corners of our lives. But not everything was perfect. Resistance still existed. Some people were so accustomed to the idea that faith should be an unshakable fortress that they couldn't see that vulnerability could be a way to strengthen that very faith. I remember a conversation with one of the older members of the congregation who told me, "You are confusing weakness with honesty. Faith should be enough to deal with pain." Those words cut me like a knife. I wanted to shout that faith was not a substitute for love and understanding. It was at that moment that I realized that change would not be instant. It was a process, and every small step we took was a victory. We needed to continue to dialogue, to challenge norms, and to create space for the voices that were being silenced to be heard. What helped me was the certainty that the transformation was happening, even if it wasn't visible to everyone. In the months that followed, we organized a series of lectures and workshops on mental health and spirituality. We invited professionals who could speak about how faith and emotional health can coexist. The response from the community was surprising. People began to engage, ask questions, and share their experiences. The silence was breaking, and this was a sign that love and empathy were infiltrating our relationships. In one of these lectures, a young man stood up and shared his story of depression and how the church had supported him, but had also made him feel invisible during his most critical moments. He said, "I wish someone had asked how I really was. Not just how are you, but how are you really?" That phrase resonated with me as a sign What we need most are people who care enough to ask and listen to the answer. And so gradually, the atmosphere in the church began to change. People started to feel more comfortable opening up. And the cycle of vulnerability and empathy was established. It was contagious. I saw people who were once just familiar faces now become friends, sharing not only their joys but also the struggles they faced. Love began to flow more authentically, but the journey was not yet complete. Some voices were still timid, and I knew more needed to be done. It was then that we decided to create a support group for those going through difficult times. The name Walking Together symbolized our intention to accompany each other in our challenges, without judgment, just love and understanding. Maria became one of the facilitators, and this helped solidify her role in the community. She was living proof that talking about pain could lead to healing. In our meetings, we learned to listen with empathy. A simple, yet powerful exercise was to not interrupt, to let the person speak until there was nothing left to say. What I saw there was a true miracle. People began to open up in ways I had never imagined. Stories of battles against anxiety, family struggles, loneliness, and the search for belonging. Each story was an invitation to connect, and love was becoming the answer to every pain. And so, the church began to transform into a refuge, a place where silence was no longer the norm. What I had learned throughout this journey was that true transformation begins when we allow ourselves to be vulnerable. By looking at each other's wounds, we were able to see not just the pain, but also the strength that resides in each one of us. Love blooms in fragility, and it was in this fragility that we found the courage to face our collective fears. One night, during one of the Walking Together group meetings, a young woman named Anna shared her experience with anxiety. She spoke about how, for years, she had felt trapped in a bubble of fear and insecurity, unable to fully connect with others. I felt as if I was always on the sidelines, watching life pass me by, she said, with her voice breaking. That statement resonated with me. I realized that many people were there, but their souls were distant, as if they were watching a movie they were not a part of. Anna continued, sharing how, at first, she had hesitated to join the group. I thought no one could understand what I was going through. But when I started to listen to your stories, I realized that I wasn't alone. Her words were an echo of the truth that we were all starting to understand. Vulnerability not only creates bonds but also offers a safe space for healing. At that moment, the room was filled with tears and smiles, and I felt that we were all healing together. It was a turning point for the group. From that night on, we decided that each meeting would include a dedicated space for sharing not just struggles, but also the small victories we achieved along the way. The idea was to celebrate the journey, not just the destinations. We gained a new understanding of how life is made up of ups and downs, and that each step, no matter how small, deserved to be acknowledged. The meetings became a space of mutual support, where everyone could open up without fear of judgment. We started creating a wall of achievements and challenges. Each person could stick a note describing something they had faced or a small victory they had achieved. As we looked at that wall, we were reminded that life is a mosaic of experiences, and that each of us contributes with our unique colors. The pain became a bit lighter when shared, and joys were multiplied when celebrated in community. It was in this welcoming environment that Maria truly began to flourish. She became an advocate for vulnerability, inspiring other women to open up about their own struggles. One day, she approached me with an idea. What if we organized a bigger event where we could invite the community to share their stories? She asked, with a sparkle in her eyes. I encouraged her, and together we started planning what would turn into a magical evening. The event Stories of Hope was an evening of celebration and connection. We invited people from all over the community to share their experiences, and the response was overwhelming. The auditorium was full, and the energy was palpable. Each story told was a testament to resilience, faith, and love. There was something magical about hearing the voices that had once been silenced, and the atmosphere was charged with emotion. A woman who had never spoken before stepped onto the stage. Her name was Clara, and she began to talk about her struggle with depression. For years, I thought I was alone in this battle, she said, with tears in her eyes. But hearing the stories of others, I realized that connection is what truly heals us. Her courage to open up and share her pain touched all of us. The audience was silent, absorbing every word. And I knew we were witnessing a transformative moment at the end of the night. People gathered in groups, talking and connecting in ways they had never imagined. The magic of vulnerability was at play, and I saw faces that had once been familiar now becoming friends, forming bonds that transcended the barriers of silence. That night became a milestone in our community, a reminder that the stories we carry are not just ours, they belong to all of us. However, we could not forget that not everyone was ready to embrace this new dynamic. Some voices still rose against the idea that vulnerability could be a strength. One day, during a service, one of the church's more conservative members gave a passionate speech about how faith should be enough to handle any difficulty. He opposed any discussion about mental health, claiming it diverted the focus from God. At that moment, I felt a lump in my throat. It was as if he were challenging everything we had fought for. But, looking at the faces around me, I realized we were not alone. There was a silent support, a network of love and understanding that had formed. I decided it was time to act, not just for myself, but for everyone who had found strength in vulnerability. I stood up slowly, my heart pounding, and asked for the floor. The murmuring in the room ceased, and all eyes turned toward me. It was as if time had stopped. I knew that what I was going to say might not please everyone, but what was at stake was much greater than my own insecurity. I understand what you are saying, I began, trying to keep my voice steady. But we need to remember that faith is not armor that isolates us from pain. Faith is a relationship, a bridge that connects us to each other. If we are not able to share our struggles, how can we truly live the love that we preach? As I spoke, I felt the energy in the room shift. Some people nodded, others seemed to reflect on my words. It was a sign that I was touching on something deep. I'm grateful to God for each one of you, for your stories, for your courage. And that's why we need to welcome the voices that have been silenced. We cannot let the idea that we must be perfect prevent us from being real. We need a place where we can be authentic, where we can share not only the victories but also the wounds. As I finished, a deep silence enveloped the auditorium. The pastor, who had been listening attentively, made a gesture of understanding. And I knew he was beginning to see what I saw. From that day on, the conversation about mental health and vulnerability began to expand. The pastor, although still with reservations, began to include in his sermons the importance of taking care of emotions and mental health. He spoke about how Jesus also cared for people in their entirety, not just their souls. If he cared for the sick and suffering, who are we to ignore the emotional pains of our brethren? Impact was palpable. People began to open up, sharing experiences that were previously kept secret. It was at one of these meetings that I met a young man named Lucas. He approached me, his eyes filled with tears. I never thought I could talk about this. I always thought I was weak for feeling this way, he said, referring to his struggle with anxiety. But hearing you, Anne Maria, made me realize I'm not alone. At that moment, I understood that every new voice that was raised was a step toward healing. Each story told was a release not only for the narrator but for all who listened. The meetings of the Walking Together group began to attract more and more participants. People who once felt isolated began to gather, creating bonds that went beyond pain. I saw mothers exchanging experiences about the pressure of being the best, young people venting about social pressure, and even church leaders sharing their own insecurities. What was once a space of silence was now a garden of flowers, where everyone contributed with their own color and scent. But, like everything in life, not everyone was ready to accept change. I remember a Sunday when a woman, known for her religious fervor, stood up during the service and began to openly criticize the church's new approach. Faith should be enough. We need to focus on God, not on our problems, she insisted, with a tone of reproach. The atmosphere became tense. Glances were exchanged, and I felt the tension in the air. But instead of letting myself be carried away by anger, I took a deep breath and remembered what I had learned along that journey. I stood up again and said, I understand your point of view. But just as faith is fundamental, so are love and compassion. We can't forget that we are here to support one another. Suffering is not a sign from weakness, but from humanity. And it is in vulnerability that we find true strength. What I did not know was that these words would be the beginning of a deeper dialogue about what it means to be a community of faith. After that day, conversations began to flow, the pastor noticing the impact the discussions were having, decided to organize a panel on mental health and faith, where experts and church members could discuss these topics. The event attracted a crowd, and for the first time, I saw familiar faces opening up in ways I never thought possible. Questions arose, stories continued to unfold, and, most importantly, empathy began to bloom. Over time, I realized that the courage of a small group was creating ripples. What started as a personal struggle turned into a collective movement. The idea that vulnerability could be a strength began to take root in the minds and hearts of many. The Silence Voices meetings became a space where stories of struggle and triumph were celebrated, and the pain. The Silence Voices meetings became a space where stories of struggle and triumph were celebrated, and the pain, once hidden, was now embraced with love. We started to realize that each story had the power to resonate in the lives of others. It was as if every word spoken became an invisible thread connecting hearts and minds, creating a support network that extended beyond those walls. One night, as I reflected on the impact these meetings were having, I decided it was time to expand our reach. What would happen if we brought our message outside of the church? What would happen if other communities could hear what we were learning about vulnerability and love? This idea filled me with hope, but also with fear. What would outsiders think? Were we ready to share our stories with a larger audience? It was then that I spoke with Maria. She was excited about the idea and suggested that we organize a community event, something that could involve not only the members of our church but also those who felt invisible in their own lives. Together, we began planning what we called the Festival of Voices, an event where people could come, share their stories, and celebrate the power that exists in vulnerability. The idea took shape quickly, and the excitement was palpable. We invited people of all ages and from different communities, spreading the word through social media and flyers. The day of the event arrived, and as I looked at the gathered crowd, my heart raced. Several people were there, eager to hear and be heard. There was a mix of nervousness and anticipation in the air. As soon as we started, a wave of energy filled the space. The stories began to flow. An elderly woman named Dona Lucia shared her struggle with loneliness after losing her husband. I thought I had to be strong, that I couldn't show my pain, but by talking about it, I realized I'm not alone, she said, with tears in her eyes. Her vulnerability was a gift. And the room was silent, absorbing every word. When it was Maria's turn, she stood up and, with a trembling voice, began to recount her experiences. For a long time, I believed I needed to be perfect to be loved, but today, I'm here to say that being authentic is what truly matters, she said. Her eyes shone with a new light, and I saw the people around us get emotional. It was a powerful transformation, and I knew we were changing the narrative. The festival turned into a night of celebration and healing. A young man named Tiago took the stage and shared his struggle with depression. For a long time, I felt trapped in a cycle of darkness. But now, by hearing the stories from you all, I feel like I can see the light again, he said. The empathy in the room was palpable. There was an understanding that each of us had our own battles but also the ability to support each other. After each story, people would approach one another, forming support circles. Conversations intensified, and I saw friendships forming right there. In the warmth of that night, it was incredible how vulnerability had the power to unite. The light that once seemed distant now shone brightly, and I realized that we were building something beyond ourselves. But while we celebrated the victories, we also acknowledged that there was still a long way to go. Some people still hesitated to open up, trapped in their own insecurities. We felt the responsibility to ensure that every voice was heard, that each story had space to be told. For this, we decided to create a mentorship program, where those who felt more comfortable could help those who were still struggling with their voices. The mentorship program began to take shape, and as soon as we extended the invitation, many people signed up. What I didn't expect was that by offering a safe space to talk about our struggles, we would also be creating an environment where healing could flourish. It was inspiring to see those connections forming, and the impact began to spread throughout the community. One of the mentors, Anna, started to stand out. Her own story of overcoming made her a powerful example for those just beginning their journey. She shared how she had battled low self-esteem and how vulnerability had set her free. I believe that we all have a light within us, but we need to be brave enough to let it shine, she would say. That message echoed in many hearts. Meanwhile, Maria became a fervent advocate for the initiatives we were implementing. She started getting involved with other communities, spreading our message of love and vulnerability further. One night, she came home radiant, and Maria came home radiant and full of stories. She had attended a gathering in a neighboring community where she shared our journey. As she described the transformation we had experienced, her glow was undeniable. The people were so receptive, she told me, her eyes shining with emotion. They were looking for something to connect them, and I could see a reflection of what we've experienced here. It was as if each one of them was waiting for someone to say, "You are not alone." Hearing Maria speak filled me with hope. It was a clear sign that our message was resonating beyond the walls of our church. What started as a small support group was becoming a larger movement. A wave of change that was beginning to reach other communities. What had once been a whisper was now becoming a shout of hope, but I knew the path would not be easy. Fear still lurked in the shadows, and some people were still reluctant to open their hearts. The resistance might be subtle, but it was palpable one afternoon. During an informal conversation with some women from our community, one of them expressed her concern. What if we start talking about all this and the church loses focus? What if people no longer want to come? Those questions resonated with me. It was true that vulnerability could be uncomfortable, but I also knew that silence only perpetuated the pain. It was necessary to find a balance, a space where faith and vulnerability could coexist. What if, instead of losing focus, we found a new path to faith? I suggested, trying to calm the anxieties. A faith that doesn't ignore pain, but welcomes and transforms it. The conversation made me reflect on the importance of creating an environment where people felt safe to share their stories, while at the same time reinforcing that faith is a pillar that sustains this journey. We needed more dialogues, more listening. It was time to include the voice of skeptics, to understand their concerns and show how vulnerability was not a sign of weakness, but of courage. We then decided to organize an open debate at the church, a space where everyone could express their opinions about the new direction we were taking. It would be an opportunity for people to feel heard and, who knows, begin to see vulnerability in a new light. Maria and I were nervous, but we knew it was a necessary step. On the night of the debate, the atmosphere was tense, the chairs were occupied, and a murmur of expectation hung in the air. The pastor opened the event, talking about the importance of being a community that supports each other, but also about the need to openly discuss emotional and spiritual health. I could feel the energy in the room change as he spoke, but there was a knot in my stomach that wouldn't leave me. When it was my turn to speak, I took a deep breath and shared our journey. I spoke about how vulnerability had become a unifying force, and how each story shared brought a little more light to a space that was previously dominated by silence. But I also addressed the concerns that had been raised, acknowledging that change is uncomfortable and that often, the fear of the unknown can paralyze us. Then, one of the older members of the congregation raised his hand and asked to speak. He was known for his religious fervor, and the room fell silent. "I understand what you are saying about vulnerability," he began, "but what about faith? Shouldn't we be focusing on God and His Word?" Instead of being distracted by our problems, the tension was palpable. What I didn't expect was for other people to start speaking up. Some agreed with him, while others raised points about the importance of dealing with emotions. The debate started to flow, and the voices began to blend, like a chorus of opinions and feelings. But how can we truly love if we are not willing to listen? A woman argued, "Faith is about connecting with others. It's about being a united body, and if parts of the body are suffering, we need to take care of them." This view brought a new energy to the discussion. I realized that despite the differences, there was a common search for understanding and connection, and it was at this moment that the conversation transformed. People began to share their personal experiences, their struggles and victories. The room became a space to vent, and as I listened to each account, my heart filled with gratitude. What once seemed like an obstacle was now becoming a bridge to new understanding. After that night, our community began to change. People were more open to discussing their emotions and supporting each other. The debate had broken barriers, and to my surprise, even the leader who had initially opposed the idea of vulnerability began to attend the Walking Together group meetings. He became an active listener, and his presence brought a new level of credibility to what we were doing. I started to notice that change was deeply rooting itself, and the connection between faith and vulnerability was finally beginning to be accepted. Over time, the walking together meetings became an even more enriching space. With each session, more faces joined us, and the room filled with stories that had previously been hidden in the shadows. A man, who was always reserved, decided to share his experience with loss. I thought I needed to be strong for everyone, but the truth is that the pain doesn't go away if we ignore it, he said. His voice choked with emotion, his courage in speaking touched everyone, and I saw tears in many eyes. At that moment, I realized that shared pain transforms into empathy, and empathy transforms into healing. Vulnerability was becoming a fabric that united our community. It was surprising how the simple act of listening to each other was creating bonds that transcended fear and insecurity. I began to see people who were once strangers now hugging, offering support, and creating a space where everyone felt safe to be authentic. But even in this welcoming environment, there were days when doubt haunted me again. Would we be able to maintain this safe space? There were moments when the fear of going backward made me hesitate. On one of those nights, while looking at all those faces, I realized that the change did not depend solely on me or Maria. It was a collective construction, a community effort. And, most importantly, it was a reflection of the internal transformation that each person was experiencing. It was in this context that we decided to organize a special event to celebrate our journey. A day when we could bring together all the voices that had been raised. A day to share not only the struggles but also the victories. The event, which we named Day of Hope, would be an opportunity to show that vulnerability is, in fact, a strength. Preparations began, and the excitement was palpable. People began to get involved in ways I had never imagined. Some offered to cook, others to share their stories, and still others volunteered to help with the organization. The energy was contagious. And the idea that we were building something meaningful united us even more. On the day of the event, the atmosphere was filled with anticipation. The space was decorated with messages of support and love, and people began to arrive, bringing with them their stories and hopes. As I looked at the gathered crowd, my heart filled with gratitude. We were about to celebrate not just our individual journeys, but the strength that comes from belonging to a supportive community. Before you leave, do two things now. Subscribe to the channel and activate the bell to receive the next messages, and share this video with someone who needs to hear this today. To continue, watch the next video. It is already in the cards and also in the description.